Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, the United Kingdom is the featured country, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson survived a confidence vote in Parliament, but with 148 Conservative MPs voting against him. Under the existing composition of Parliament, a no-confidence vote would be triggered if 54 Members of Parliament, MPs, submitted their letters to Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the Backbench 1922 Committee, making clear their lack of confidence in the sitting Prime Minister. On June 6, 2022, Sir Brady notified Prime Minister Johnson that the 54 MP threshold had been met and that a confidence vote would take place later in the day. For the Prime Minister to lose the confidence vote, at least 180 Tory MPs would have to vote against him, Tory being Conservative. Should that occur and the Prime Minister would be ousted from in a no-confidence vote, he would have to stand down. Should the Prime Minister win the confidence vote, he would not, under the existing rules, be subject to another vote of no confidence for a year. This internecine imbroglio within the Conservative Party had been ongoing for some time, as members of the Prime Minister's party railed against him for breaking COVID-19 lockdown rules at Downing Street during the first year of the pandemic. Dubbed Partygate, the controversy brewed for some time, with some of Johnson's own cohorts within the Tories being greatly angered about the unethical conduct of the head of government and his inner circle at Downing Street. So it was that the vote of no confidence went forward. The vote was 211 in Prime Minister Johnson's favour, meaning that he essentially won the confidence vote. The problem for the Prime Minister was that a significant number of Tory MPs, 148, voted against him, expressing no confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party and the sitting Prime Minister. In remarks to reporters, Prime Minister Johnson said that the vote result was an extremely good, positive, conclusive, decisive result, which enabled them to move on. While Prime Minister Johnson insisted that he had secured a decisive victory, the size of the revolt against him delivered quite a different message. Indeed, the Prime Minister emerged from the confidence vote in a weakened, even wounded state. Leaders of the opposition party showed little mercy or restraint in their comments regarding the outcome of the vote brought by the Prime Minister's own Conservative Party. I want to recapitulate what I said earlier. Under the existing rules, a Prime Minister who survives a vote of no confidence would not be subject to such a challenge again for a year. That being said, the rules could ostensibly be changed to facilitate another confidence vote with the intent of ousting Johnson. Indeed, with crucial by-elections in the offing in the constituencies of Wakefield and Tiverton-Honiton, Wakefield was expected to be won by Labour. Tiverton and Honiton was an overwhelmingly Tory stronghold in 2019. Should it swing to Labour, the pressure would be upon Johnson, and it would be intense. Staying in Europe, Russia has warned the West against sending long-range weapons to Ukraine. At the start of June 2022, Russia was carrying out its brutal assault on Ukraine, targeting the eastern region. The Ukrainian governor of the region, Serhiy Haidai, indicated that Ukrainian forces were prepared to fiercely resist the Russians and insisted that they could hold on so long as they had artillery and long-range weaponry. These long-range precision weapon systems were on the way from the United States and would provide Ukraine with the ability to strike Russian targets with longer range. Of particular importance was the decision by the United States to send the M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS, to Ukraine. The HIMARS weapon system fires precision-guided rockets and can strike targets up to 45 miles away. Use of the HIMARS system would immeasurably accentuate Ukraine's offensive weapons capabilities. The Biden administration noted that they had decided to provide Ukraine with a rocket artillery system after it was assured by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that it would not be used to attack targets inside Russia. The United States would also supply Ukraine with anti-tank weapons, tactical vehicles, and helicopters. Ukraine would also be the recipient of large multiple rocket batteries from the United Kingdom. As well, Germany announced that it would provide Ukraine with its Iris-T air defense system. In response, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that his country would expand its list of targets to attack if Western countries sent long-range weapons to Ukraine. The Russian leader made the comments as fresh airstrikes were reported in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Across the world in the Caribbean, the environmental minister of the Dominican Republic, Orlando Jorge Mera, was shot dead during a meeting with businessman Miguel Cruz. The spokesperson for the presidency, Homero Figueroa, said that Cruz was in police custody and there was an investigation underway as to the motive. What was known was that Jorge Mera and Cruz were at odds on environmental policy. Moving on to islands on the other side of the world, Pacific Island nations were resisting pressure from China to sign on to a Trade Investments and Security Pact. Last week I discussed the bilateral security agreement between China and the Solomon Islands that sparked concerns about Beijing's expanded geostrategic influence in the Pacific. That controversial pact would allow Chinese military personnel and naval vessels to be deployed to the Solomon Islands and would set the course for the establishment of a Chinese military base in close proximity to Australia. Soon thereafter, it was clear that China would not stop with the Solomon Islands. In fact, it would seek to forge similar deals with other Pacific Island nations, such as Kiribati, only 3,000 kilometers from the site of the United States Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii. By the start of June 2022, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi was on a tour of the Pacific region with the goal of pursuing similar trade investment security pacts with Pacific Island nations in the region. The agreements were aimed at increasing China's geostrategic influence and bringing these small island nations more closely within Beijing's orbit. Being more closely within Beijing's orbit and more economically dependent on Beijing would ostensibly translate into more China-friendly positions on international issues. Stated another way, with more vassal states of Beijing in the Pacific, China could count on more votes going its way at the United Nations, and certainly with regard to its claims on Taiwan. While the Solomon Islands had gone ahead and signed on to the deal amid controversy at home, other Pacific islands were pressing the proverbial brakes. Certain aspects of the pact's agreements, particularly the security measures, were cause for concern. The program of regional policing was indicative of Chinese interest in creating a new Beijing-centered security architecture in the Pacific region. For many Pacific Island countries, there was a genuine anger over the possible encroachment on sovereignty. The governments of Micronesia, Samoa, Fiji, and Palau demonstrated outrage over China's intended encroachment into their governing and economic affairs. In the short term, it was clear that China had overreached, and its efforts appeared to have ended in failure outside of the Solomon Islands. Nevertheless, China has signaled that it remained interested in pursuing bilateral relationships with Pacific Island nations, and would very likely continue to go down this road. China soon released a position paper asserting that it was still committed to deepening its strategic partnership with Pacific Island nations. In the background of China's attempt to establish strategic perches in the Pacific, the alarm bells were going off across the West, not only in Washington, D.C., but also in Canberra. To that end, Australia, a traditional ally to many Pacific Island nations, has been concerned about increasing Chinese influence in the region for years. In order to counter Chinese investment in the region, Australia established an infrastructure fund earmarked for the region, and also launched a Pacific step-up policy to re-engage with its neighbors in the Pacific. I'd like to also discuss the political landscape related to France's upcoming parliamentary elections, which would be a test for President Emmanuel Macron's centrist Together coalition against the consolidated leftist coalition. Going into these elections, President Macron's party En Marche, which was renamed Renaissance, had the most seats in Parliament. He would need to retain that advantage in order to advance his agenda. The other main parties contesting the election were Les Républicains, the Republicans, a traditional conservative party, the center-right Democratic Movement, the centrist Liberal Union of Democrats and Independents, the center-left Social Democratic Socialist Party, La France Insoumise, LFI, a democratic socialist left-wing populist party, and the National Rally or National Front, a hard-right nationalist extremist party. In May of 2022, the formation of a leftist coalition served to upend expectations in the French parliamentary elections. Of significance was the agreement formed by La France Insoumise, LFI, the Socialist Party, the Communist and the Greens, to jointly challenge newly elected President Macron's agenda and possibly deprive Renaissance of its majority. The coalition deal meant that France would see its first significant left-wing coalition in 20 years. At the helm of the leftist NUP coalition was LFI firebrand leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who barely missed making it to the second round of the presidential election. On the other side of the equation was the centrist Ensemble Together coalition, headed by Macron's Renaissance, but also including several other centrist parties. By June 2022, it was clear that the main parliamentary battle would be fought between the leftist coalition of Mélenchon and the centrist coalition of Macron. Polling data suggested that Macron and the centrists were at risk of losing their parliamentary majority. Why is this election important? I always like to ask that question. Should Macron Together coalition fail to emerge as the biggest party in parliament, Macron would be forced into political cohabitation, a scenario that would sharply stymie his agenda. It should be noted that France had not been in a state of cohabitation since 1997 to 2002, when Conservative President Jacques Chirac was forced to work with Socialist Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. Finally, I'd like to note that I'll be covering the January 6th House Select Committee hearings that began on June 9th in the United States and will continue through the month. I'll be centering the worst attack on American democracy and modernity and the allegations that it was incited by the 45th President of the United States. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com and also on Amazon.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember, now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.